Get a job, disgusting walking zombie, my son sneered, while counting my pension money that I had just withdrawn from the ATM, but he didn't know that he was shortening his time in this house. That night, I slept with my back to the door, the habit I developed after my husband died. I never lost that instinct. To protect the front, brace for the noise, the push, the shame that always came from behind. I woke early, before the house stirred. The sun had not yet cracked the edges of the kitchen blinds, but I moved quietly, making coffee, slicing apples, buttering toast, just the way they liked it. Not because they deserved it, but because I was still someone's mother, still someone's grandmother, and old habits die slower than old women. As I set the plates down on the table, I heard the shuffle of my son's slippers dragging across the floor, the yawn he never covered, and the phone clutched in his hand as if it were fused to his skin. He slumped into the chair like a king returning to a throne he never built. "About time," he said, glancing at his watch. "Next time, try not to wake the whole damn house with your arthritis parade." He took the coffee and slurped it loud, without so much as a glance. I poured mine, quietly, and sat at the corner of the table, folding my hands in my lap. "You're lucky, you know," he said after a while, chewing with his mouth open. "Most people your age don't have family that puts up with them. They rot in homes, cold beds, strangers changing their diapers. But not you, you've got us." The way he said, "us," made my skin crawl. His wife came in next, still in her robe, scrolling her phone, eyeing me like I was a stain that refused to wash out of the rug. "She overcooked the eggs again," she muttered, pushing her plate an inch away. "Do you not taste your own food before serving it?" "Maybe her taste buds rotted with the rest of her," he said, smirking. They laughed together, the kind of laugh that made the room feel smaller. I entered the slice of apple on my plate, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for it. I thought about all the times I had peeled fruit for him when he was little, how I used to cut the seeds out in the shape of stars to make him smile. "She's practically furniture at this point," his wife said. "Takes up space, collects dust, does not contribute anything meaningful." I stood up to take my plate to the sink, but my hands slipped. The porcelain hit the floor hard, shattering into dozens of tiny sharp pieces. It echoed louder than I expected. "You stupid!" He jumped to his feet, fists clenched. "Are you serious?" I immediately crouched to pick up the mess. My knees burned, my hips screamed. I bent over like a rag doll being folded back into a box. He marched over and hovered above me. "You need to stop this. You think we're made of money to keep replacing dishes? What's wrong with you?" I kept my eyes down, reaching for the jagged edges. One piece caught the inside of my finger, slicing clean and deep. A thin line of blood trailed down to the floor. I wiped it with the sleeve of my sweater. Then came the sound of paper. Crisp, fresh paper. Bills. I looked up. My son sneered while counting my pension money that I had just withdrawn from the ATM. He held it up, flicking through the bills like it was some kind of game show. His eyes gleamed with something darker than greed. Control. Triumph. "You think this makes you useful?" he said, waving the stack in front of me. "You think we feed you, clothe you, house you, out of kindness?" He walked over and crouched next to me. I flinched slightly, and he saw it. He grinned wider. "Get a job, disgusting walking zombie. But remember, your salary belongs to us." Then, with a casual flick of his hand, he slapped the stack of bills against my cheek, not hard, but it did not have to be hard. It was meant to humiliate. And it did. I froze. I could hear his wife laughing behind him. Not loud, just enough, just cruel enough. "You want a tissue?" she asked. "For your old feelings?" He stood up and tossed the money onto the table like garbage. "Clean this up," he said, pointing to the broken dish, "and try not to bleed on anything else." I stayed on the floor long after they had walked out. The baby cried from the other room. No one moved. I picked myself up slowly, cradling my hand, the blood mixing with the soapy dishwater as I rinsed what was left of the morning away. I felt visible, yet dehumanized, a shadow of usefulness, a guilt trip walking on two legs. But in that moment, blood on my sleeve, knees aching, face still stinging from the slap of money, I remembered something, and remembered who I was before I became furniture. before I became the old woman in the corner who cooked and cleaned in exchange for being allowed to exist. And I remembered what they had forgotten. The house was not theirs. Not entirely, not legally, not morally, and not for much longer. People like to believe old women have always been old. They see the wrinkles, the slow steps, the trembling hands, and assume that's all we ever were. Fragile, forgetful, fading. But I wasn't born a shadow. And I wasn't always quiet. There was a time my legs could carry me through floods. My voice could steady a whole unit of soldiers. My hands held more than trembling spoons and shattered plates. They held lives. In my youth, I served as a medical technician in the military. Most people are surprised when I tell them that. I suppose I don't look like someone who used to carry stretchers through sandstorms or stitch open wounds while the ceiling shook from nearby shell fire. But I did, and I was good at it. I had a head for numbers, a calm mind under pressure, and a gift for sensing when something was about to go wrong. The boys called me Radar because I could predict when a patient was about to crash before the monitors did. Some mocked me. Others trusted me with their last breath. I remember every name, every face, every pair of eyes that looked at me with hope in the middle of chaos. Later, when I returned to civilian life, I didn't slow down. I worked in the emergency room of our county hospital, did night shifts when the younger nurses wanted holidays off, and spent weekends teaching first aid in the community center. My hands were always moving, my mind always sharp, my back never turned on anyone who needed help, and yet somehow all that got lost. Or rather, buried, under the diapers I changed, the dinners I cooked, the silence I accepted. I was not always just mom. I was not always just grandma. And I sure as hell was not born to be called a burden. But the moment they stopped needing me, they started erasing me. I started under Ariel's life. At least, the life I knew later. That was the worst part. Not the neglect, not the insults, not even the loneliness. It was the rewriting. As if my life started only when I became useful to them. But there is someone who never let me forget who I was. Her name is Elise. She was 7 years old when I met her, and she was dying. It was during a historic flood in my hometown, one of those once-in-a-century disasters that drowns memories and families in the same breath. I was visiting my sister at the time when the river spilled over and turned streets into rivers. Sirens screamed. Trees snapped. People screamed names that no longer had answers. I saw her clinging to a thin branch near the edge of a collapsed bridge. Her arms were purple from the cold. Her mouth was just above the waterline. Her eyes, my God, her eyes, were wide with terror and locked onto mine the moment I spotted her from the hill. I didn't think. I didn't shout. I ran. The water tore at my legs. Cold enough to steal breath. Sharp enough to feel like knives, but I kept moving, one step at a time, my eyes fixed on that little girl. I reached her just as the branch snapped. She fell into my arms instead of the current. She did not speak for hours, not even in the ambulance, just held onto my shirt like it was the only thing tethering her to life. Her parents had died. Car swept off the road, both gone in an instant. She was alone in the world. But that night in the hospital, when the nurse asked her who I was, she whispered, "That's my mom." At first they thought it was shock, trauma, misplaced trust. But the weeks passed and she didn't change her mind. I visited her every day until she was discharged, and then every weekend, then every birthday, every holiday, every time the school called and said she had no one to pick her up. Eventually, I signed the papers. Officially, she went into the foster system. Unofficially, she was mine. I did not raise her. I guided her. She was never a replacement for my son. She was a choice. Elise grew up with fire in her chest and a mind that never stopped asking questions. She read everything, questioned everything. She wanted to know how I stitched wounds without blinking, why I never married again, why I kept my medals in a drawer instead of on the wall. And every time I answered her, she listened, not out of duty, but because she truly wanted to know. Even now, decades later, she calls me every Sunday without fail. "Hey, Mom," she says, "tell me something I don't know about you." And I always do. A story from my past, a patient I remember, a scar I never told anyone about. And she listens like it matters. Like I matter. Last week when she called, I told her about a time I had to perform CPR on a 6-year-old while the generator failed and the room was in total darkness. She cried. She said, "You are so much more than they let you be." She meant them. My son, his wife, the people who see me as a walking expense report with a pulse. Elise has offered to take me in before. I always said no. I didn't want to feel like I was running. But now, I am starting to understand that staying is not strength. Sometimes silence is cowardice. Sometimes love is louder when it comes from those who are not born into it. She never calls me a burden. She never makes me feel like a shadow. She sees the whole of me, and she reflects it back with pride. She does not look at my hands and see weakness. She sees the hands that pulled her from death. And every time I hear her voice, I remember I was not born old. I was not born helpless. I was not born to be anyone's servant. And I will not die anyone's shame. There is a quiet kind of cruelty that does not scream or slap. It whispers. It smiles while it sharpens the knife. It comes in the form of politeness, of "we're just helping," of "sign here, it's nothing." And the longer you stay silent, the deeper the blade goes. It started with papers. My daughter-in-law slid them across the table one afternoon while I was folding the baby's laundry. The baby, who still smiled when she saw me. The only one who did. "It's just a little formality," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Something the bank needs in case of emergencies, so we can help manage things for you." She said the word manage, the way someone talks about garbage collection. I looked down at the papers, pages of small print, words I had not seen since I left the hospital world. Financial power of attorney, full access, revocable, but only under mutual agreement. "You'll still have control," she lied without blinking. "What about this?" Her eldest daughter, who didn't have much money. "It's just to make things easier, in case something happens." My son said nothing. He just stood behind her, arms crossed, nodding like a bouncer at a nightclub that would never let me in again. "I'd like to read it first," I said. Her smile cracked. "Of course, but no need to overthink it. It's standard." I took it to my room. I did read it, every word, twice. And then I put it in the back of my sewing kit, where I knew they would not look. That was the first trick. The second was more subtle. My grandson, all of 12 years old, suddenly became concerned about Grandma. He started sitting with me more, asking me questions, who I was talking to, what I was writing in my notebook, if I had any weird dreams. I knew the difference between care and surveillance. I had seen it in war zones, and I was seeing it again on my own porch. One day, he brought me my coat before I left for a walk, a simple gesture, sweet even. But when I slipped it on, something in the lining crinkled, too stiff, too new. I reached into the pocket and felt it, a square bump, smaller than a phone, thinner than a wallet, a tracker. I said nothing, just walked. Later that evening, as I folded the coat over my lap, I pressed the device between my palms until I could feel its heat. They wanted to know where I went, who I saw, what I did. I was no longer a grandmother, I was a security risk. At dinner, they acted like nothing was wrong, like I was not bleeding freedom from 1,000 small wounds. That week, they changed the passcode on the safe in the hallway. When I asked why, my son said, "For your protection." When I asked for the new code, he said, "Why would you need it?" I reminded him I kept my will and personal papers inside. "That's why we changed it," his wife said, not looking up from her plate. "To keep you from making emotional decisions you'll regret." They laughed. I did not. Later that night, I tried the keypad. Locked. Just like my phone after 7 p.m. They said it was to help me sleep better. "No screens before bed, Mom," my son had said, patting my shoulder like I was a toddler who forgot how to lie down. Except it was not about sleep, it was about silence. They did not want me talking to Elise, did not want me sharing stories or fears or, God forbid, plans. They wanted me quiet. Still, passive, like a maid with memory loss. "You're lucky we don't charge you rent," his wife told me one morning when I asked if I could have my phone back early. "You're here on charity, remember that?" "Charity?" I asked, genuinely confused. She pointed to the refrigerator. Whose name is on the grocery receipt? Whose name is on the internet bill? Mine, I said, or at least, it was. For over 2 decades, she scoffed. That was then, this is now. Then built this house, painted its walls, paid its first 3 mortgages, fixed its roof when the tree fell in '94. But now, had no room for memory. Now I was a tenant without keys, a ghost with bills, a servant with no title. One morning I walked into the laundry room and found my daughter-in-law tearing open a letter addressed to me. No guilt, no hesitation. What are you doing? I asked. She looked up, startled for once. Oh, just making sure it's nothing serious. You get confused sometimes. I was not confused. I was erased. They started locking the medicine cabinet. So you do not mix things up. They started measuring my milk. You're drinking too much, they said. They started taking inventory of my drawers. We just want to be sure nothing gets misplaced. I was not a person anymore. I was an object, a liability, a living expense. Until the day I found the second tracker. Not in my coat this time, in the seam of my purse. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding it in my palm like a sacred object. It blinked once every few seconds, a small red pulse that said, "We are watching." I stared at it until it burned an imprint into my skin. Then I smiled. Because now I was certain. They were afraid, not of me, but of what I might remember, of what I might still be capable of what might happen if I stopped playing the role they wrote for me. That night, I made tea, and I began to plan. It started with silence. They did not speak to me at breakfast, not even a glance. My son scrolled through his phone with the same dead eyes he gave the evening news. His wife poured cereal for herself and left the kitchen without touching a dish. Even the baby looked confused. I thought maybe, just maybe, they had given up. That was my mistake. Because sometimes silence is not mercy. It is ammunition being loaded behind closed doors. Later that morning, they called me into the living room. It felt like being summoned to court, except there was no judge, only a jury of people who had already made up their minds. My son was standing by the mantel. His wife sat on the couch, with a laptop open and her arms folded. My grandson lingered near the stairs, pretending to play with his tablet. I stepped in slowly. "Sit down," she said, without looking at me. I did not sit. My son held up a printed spreadsheet, stapled neatly, highlighted in yellow. "Want to explain this?" I squinted. It was a call log. My call log. Lines and lines of numbers, timestamps, durations, all outgoing, all to one person. "Elise," I said quietly. His face twitched. 14 times, in 1 month, he said. "You think we wouldn't notice? I was just what?" his wife snapped. "Plotting? Confessing? Whispering your little sob stories to someone who's not even your blood?" I blinked. She slammed the laptop shut and stood up, the spreadsheet still trembling in her hand. "Do you think we're stupid? Do you think we don't know what this is about?" What is about?" She threw the paper onto the floor. "The house, you senile old bat! You think we don't know you're planning to leave this place to that stray you picked up from the flood like a wet dog? Elise is not family," she screamed, stepping closer. "She's trash. She's nothing. And you," she jabbed a finger at my chest, "are a delusional old woman clinging to fairy tales because your real family has stopped pretending to care." I took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. My son moved closer now, folding the spreadsheet like he was about to pocket a confession. "You really think you get to choose?" he asked, voice low, dangerous. "You think you have a say in what happens when you're gone?" I stared at him. "Do you think a piece of paper will change anything? When you die, we're the ones who'll clean your body, sell your things, burn your pictures, and pretend for 10 years you weren't an embarrassment." That hit harder than the money ever did. He leaned in, close enough that I could feel his breath on my cheek. "Do you think you have the right to choose your will? When you die, you're just a corpse that needs to be cleared away." I had heard worse. From enemies in war, from strangers in emergency rooms, but never from my own blood. Still, I stood my ground. "Elise is the only one who asks if I've eaten," I said. "The only one who remembers my birthday, the only one who listens when I speak." My daughter-in-law laughed. A cruel, throaty laugh that made the room colder. You want to reward her for doing what? Picking up the phone? You'd throw away your whole family for a phone call? You are not my family, I said. Not anymore. That was the last straw. My son lunged for my phone, snatched it from my sweater pocket before I could react. His grip crushed my wrist bone for just a second too long. You don't get to talk to her anymore, he growled. You don't get to talk to anyone. He stormed out of the room with my phone. His wife followed. I was left standing in the middle of a room that had once been mine, now colder than any hospital ward I had ever worked in. That night, they turned off the internet. They locked the doors from the outside. And I knew in the deepest part of my gut, I had been officially erased. There is a kind of silence that follows betrayal. It does not scream or echo. It hovers. It lingers in the corners of the room, between door frames and half-finished sentences. That was the silence that lived with us now. After they confiscated my phone and cut off my access to the outside world, I stopped speaking entirely. Not out of fear, but because there was no one in that house worth my words anymore. They thought they had won. And that made them careless. Especially him. My son never could hold his liquor. Not in college, not as a young man. And not now, with a belly bloated from beer and a brain softened by entitlement. He drank every Friday, sometimes Saturday, never to celebrate, only to forget. That night, I heard him stumble into the kitchen around 11 p.m. The floorboards creaked under his weight, bottles clinked, a drawer slammed. I sat in the dark, upstairs, pretending to sleep. Then I heard the call. I could not make out the first words, but I recognized the cadence of his voice when he thought he was invincible. Loud, mocking, smirking through syllables. What I did not know was that he had called Elise, intentionally, drunkenly, to brag, and to destroy. The next day I found out exactly what he said. He had called her from the landline, my landline, laughing into the receiver like a villain in a play. You think she loves you, he slurred. You think you matter to her? Pause. I'm her real family, not you. I wipe her drool. I watch her shuffle around like a half-dead scarecrow. And guess what? I'm going to bleed her dry. Another pause. Then came the line that changed everything. I'll suck her pension like a vampire until she croaks. That's what she's for. That's what old people are for. And then, you're nothing, by the way, trash she picked up during a pity parade. She doesn't love you. No one does, just like her. No one has ever really loved her. That's why she clings to leeches like you. Elise recorded every word. She sat there, in her studio apartment across town, listening to a man she had never met speak of the woman who saved her as if she were a carcass to harvest. She said nothing. She let him speak, let him bury himself. When he finally hung up, laughing at his own cruelty, she sat in the dark for 10 full minutes, staring at the waveform on her phone. Then she pressed save, and then she called her lawyer. The next morning, while I was folding laundry I would never wear, the doorbell rang. My daughter-in-law answered it. Her voice turned tight when she saw who it was. Elise, she said coldly, what are you doing here? I could not see her, but I could hear the calm. I'm here to speak to my mother. She's resting. No, she's surviving, they argued, quietly, sharply. Then Elise said something that made the whole house freeze. I have a recording, from your husband, from last night. Footsteps, a slam, then silence. Moments later, Elise walked into my room. She looked the same, taller than I remembered, stronger somehow. Her hair was pulled back, her coat still wet from the rain. But her eyes were burning. I stood up slowly. She opened her arms. I stepped into them like I had done all those years ago when she was small and terrified of thunder. He called you, she whispered. He told me everything. I know, I said. I heard him laughing through the vents. I recorded it. I know. She pulled back, holding my shoulders. You are coming with me. They won't let me. They do not have a choice anymore. Because this was no longer about feelings, no longer about familial resentment or hurt pride. This was now about dignity, about legality, about what a person becomes when they mistake control for care. Elise contacted her attorney that afternoon. She filed a report for elder financial abuse, emotional coercion, and illegal surveillance. She submitted the audio file. She attached transcripts. She provided a list of dates, incidents, medical records, and signed character references from every community service I had ever touched in my long, quiet life. She did it all without raising her voice. Because truth does not need to shout to win. By the time the sun set, the file had been downloaded by 3 legal offices and 1 local reporter who owed Elise a favor. By midnight, it was circulating among elder care advocacy groups. And by morning, the vampire had a name: my son, my shame. And from that moment on, his voice, his drunken, damning voice, was no longer a weapon. It was evidence. I had kept the box for 20 years, tucked behind a false wall panel in the attic, where dust made a second skin for everything too painful to touch. Inside was no jewelry, no heirloom, no photo album. Just truth, wrapped in silence. The truth that should have come out long ago. But when you are a mother, your instincts betray you. You learn to protect even the things that should not be protected. You cover up sins with good intentions. You lie for your children until those lies become the rope they hang you with. It was a rainy night, 20 years ago, the kind of rain that turns roads into rivers and headlights into blurred halos. My son was 19, reckless, loud, just like his father used to be. He had borrowed the car after dinner. I remember telling him not to go. "The roads are flooding," I said. "Stay in, watch a movie, just tonight." He smirked and said he knew what he was doing. He always said that. At 2:14 a.m., the knock came. Not the police, my husband. He had already gone out looking for him because the storm was bad and he had a bad feeling. He found the car in a ditch. The front hood crumpled like a crushed can, blood on the windshield. There was a girl, 7 years old, lost from her parents in the flood, trying to cross to a shelter. My son hit her. She survived. Barely. He fled the scene in panic, came home shaking, wet and drunk. He begged us not to call anyone. He begged us to save his future. So we did something no parent should ever do. We covered it up. My husband took the blame, wrote a statement, claimed he was driving, claimed the girl ran into the road. They let it go. No charges, no press, no fuss, just a broken girl and a bent story. And I took care of the girl, quietly, financially, lovingly. Her name was Elise. I visited her in the hospital every day for a month. I paid for physical therapy under a different name. I stayed by her side through the nightmares, the bone surgeries, the grief, and I never told her the truth, because I could not destroy her second chance at family by revealing the first one tried to kill her. But now that girl was a woman who called me Mom, a woman who just had her soul spit on by the man who had once left her in the middle of the road like she was nothing. And suddenly, the box in the attic did not feel like a secret anymore. It felt like a weapon. It contained a VHS tape from the dashcam showing the impact, a hospital intake form listing hit and run in the medical notes, a letter my husband wrote me months before he died, confessing everything and begging for forgiveness, and a second letter from my son, dated the next day after the crash. A hastily scribbled apology, never sent to anyone, filled with fear but no remorse. I dusted off the box. My hands did not shake. For the first time in decades, I felt steady. The next morning, I had Elise meet me outside the local post office. No cameras, no microphones, just us. I handed her the box. She opened it. She cried. She did not ask why I had kept it. She already knew. She just said, "It's time." She contacted her producer, not the usual team, the investigative team, the one that handled government cover-ups, corporate crimes, political scandals. She said, "I have something big, bigger than I ever imagined." Within 72 hours, the footage was digitized, the documents verified, the handwriting cross-matched, and the story drafted. They called it Mother's Burden, the hidden hit and run that haunted a hero. The story wasn't just about the crash. It was about me, about a woman who saved a child while hiding the monster who almost killed her, about silence as a form of protection and how that silence nearly destroyed everything. They gave me a chance to speak on record. I did. I sat in a chair under bright lights and said, "I thought I was saving my son's future, but I was only delaying his reckoning." and betraying someone who loved me for the truth I had buried. I did not cry. Not until the final cut aired, when Elise held my hand during the last scene and whispered, "You don't owe him anything anymore." That night, my phone, newly returned, rang for the first time in weeks. It was my son. I did not answer, because now he had to explain himself to the world. It had been 1 week since I left, 1 week since Elise packed my belongings with gentle hands, placed a soft shawl over my shoulders, and walked me out the front door of the house I had paid for but never truly owned. No one stopped me. Not a word, not a hand raised, not a door slammed. Just silence, the kind of silence that follows a storm that wrecked everything you once used to hide behind. Elise drove me to her apartment that night. Small, warm, and filled with books and light. She gave me her bed. She slept on the couch. She made soup. She brushed my hair like I used to brush hers. And when I asked if I had done the right thing, she said, "Mom, you finally told the truth. That's always the right thing." Then, 7 days later, the doorbell rang. It was my lawyer. He looked nervous, professional, dressed in a charcoal suit that smelled like importance and envelope glue. He held a thick folder in his hands. "They're expecting me today," he said. "Are you sure you don't want to come?" "No," I replied. "Let them hear it without me." He nodded. He understood. He took the elevator down without looking back, and at exactly 2:00 p.m., he arrived at the house I had built, the house with the garden I had planted, the wallpaper I had chosen, the porch swing I had bought after my husband died. They were all there. My son, arms crossed, eyes bloodshot. His wife, pacing. Their son, silent and wide-eyed. They had been summoned by letter. Not a phone call, not a warning, just one line. "Per the execution of Dorothy L. Harper's last will and testament, your presence is required." The lawyer laid the folder on the kitchen table. He opened it with ceremony, slowly, as if he were peeling back the skin of a long-dead lie. "This will was signed and notarized 5 years ago," he began. "It supersedes all previous versions and was filed under sealed record until now." My son shifted. "I thought she updated it last year," he said. "No," the lawyer replied calmly. "You assumed she did," my daughter-in-law scoffed. "She said she would leave the house to the family." The lawyer looked at her. "She did." Then he turned the page. "To the only person who has called me Mom without expecting anything in return." They froze. My son blinked. "I leave the house at 431 Willow Lane. The savings account ending in 7814. The certificate of deposit in the amount of $200,000, 0 cents, and the remaining balance of my retirement portfolio. Estimated total, $1,200,000, 0 cents. He paused, then continued, "To Elise M. Harper, the child I chose with my heart, not my blood." There was a silence no one could rescue. My son stood up. "That's a joke," he said, his voice rising. "That's not legal." "It is. She manipulated her." "No," the lawyer said. "Your mother initiated this will long before Elise ever became a journalist. She recorded her intentions in video, written statement, and private sessions with a notary. Would you like to see the footage?" My daughter-in-law turned pale. "She left us nothing?" she asked. "She left you something," he replied. He flipped to the final page. "To those who believed my love was transactional, my presence was burdensome, and my body was an expense, I leave only this lesson. Inheritance is not an obligation, it is a reflection." My son's face turned red. His wife opened her mouth, then closed it again. "She cannot do this," he said, his voice shaking now. "She did," the lawyer said. And with that he packed the folder, stood up, and walked out. Elise told me what happened afterward. She said they sat there in stunned silence for over an hour, that my grandson eventually asked if I was okay, that my son said nothing at all, and then she drove to me. She opened the door, stepped in, and handed me a single rose. "She left it on the kitchen table," Elise said. "The baby. She picked it from the garden." I held the rose. It smelled like summer. It smelled like freedom. I looked at Elise and smiled. "You are my family," I said. "I always was," she replied. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was no longer a ghost haunting a house. I was someone. I was home. Some people think revenge is loud. that it comes with shouting, courtroom drama, or slammed doors, but the deepest kind of justice, the kind that lasts, is quiet. It's a will signed in silence, a truth released after decades, a woman choosing, for once, to love herself more than her fears. I wasn't born to be forgotten, and I won't die without being heard. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, or carried a truth too heavy for one heart alone, then you belong here. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where silence ends and memory begins, because when a grandmother speaks, the world finally listens.